What it was like to be a Victorian brothel worker. Real stories. The Victorian era, 1837 to 1901, was a time of stark contrasts: industrial progress and moral conservatism, wealth and poverty, propriety and vice. Behind the facade of respectability lay a thriving sex trade that employed thousands of women across Britain. This account examines the real experiences of Victorian brothel workers, drawn from historical records, court documents, medical reports, and the rare first-hand testimonies that survived from this era. The economic reality, why women entered the trade, Maryanne's story, from factory to brothel. Maryanne Pearson's journey into prostitution began in 1847, when she was just 16 years old. Working in a Manchester cotton mill, she earned barely enough to survive on, about 6 shillings per week when rent alone cost 3 shillings. When the mill closed due to economic downturn, Maryanne faced destitution. Like many women of her class, she discovered that sex work could provide immediate income that far exceeded anything available through legitimate employment. Her first experience in a brothel came through desperation. Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison, who ran an establishment on Great Ancoat Street, offered Maryanne food, shelter, and the promise of earning up to 15 shillings per week, more than double her factory wages. The reality proved more complex. While the potential earnings were real, Maryanne soon discovered the various deductions, rent for her room, meals, clothing, and protection fees that significantly reduced her actual income. The needle trade connection. Sarah Johnson's path to brothel work illustrates another common route. A skilled seamstress in London's East End, Sarah worked 16-hour days in cramped conditions for piece-rate wages. During the seasonal downturns in the clothing trade, many seamstresses turned to prostitution to survive. Sarah first began taking clients in 1852 during a particularly harsh winter when needlework was scarce. Her transition was gradual, beginning with occasional clients found through other seamstresses, then moving to working from lodging houses, and eventually joining a more established brothel on Drury Lane. The brothel provided steady clients and relative safety, though at the cost of personal freedom and a significant portion of her earnings. The hierarchy of Victorian brothels. High-end establishments. The experience of Catherine Walters. Catherine Walters, known as Skittles, represents the pinnacle of Victorian sex work. Operating from elegant addresses in Mayfair and Belgravia, she catered to aristocrats and wealthy merchants. Her establishment on South Street was furnished with Persian carpets, crystal chandeliers, and fine art. Clients paid upwards of £50 per visit, equivalent to several months' wages for a working-class family. Walters maintained strict standards. Clients were screened, appointments were by arrangement only, and discretion was paramount. Her workers, typically numbering 6 to 8 women, were expected to be educated, well-dressed, and capable of sophisticated conversation. They received training in etiquette, literature, and current affairs to better serve their wealthy clientele. The women in Walters' establishment earned significantly more than their counterparts in lower-class brothels, often £3 to £5 per week after expenses. However, the pressure to maintain appearances was enormous. Clothing costs alone could consume a third of their income, and any sign of aging or illness meant immediate dismissal. Mid-level houses. The reality of business. Most Victorian brothels operated at the middle level, serving clerks, shopkeepers, and skilled tradesmen. The establishment run by Mrs. Charlotte Price on Regent Street in the 1860s exemplifies this category. Price maintained a house with 12 rooms, employing 10 women regularly, and additional help during busy periods. Each woman had her own room, which she rented for 10 shillings per week. Meals were provided for an additional 5 shillings weekly. The women kept their earnings from clients, but Price took a substantial cut, typically 30 to 40% of all fees. Clients paid between 2 to 5 shillings for services, depending on duration and specific requests. The daily routine was strictly regulated. Women were expected to be available from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. 6 days per week. Sundays were nominally free, though many women used this time for additional clients or personal business. Price maintained order through a combination of financial incentives and physical intimidation, employing male protectors who dealt with unruly clients or disobedient workers. Low-end establishments, survival in the slums. At the bottom of the hierarchy were the brothels serving labourers, sailors, and the unemployed. These establishments, often located in areas like Whitechapel, Southwark, and the Docks, provided basic services at minimal cost. Ellen Murphy ran such a house on Dorset Street in Spitalfields from 1875 to 1889. Murphy's establishment was a converted tenement building housing up to 20 women in cramped conditions. Each woman paid 4 shillings per week for a bed in a shared room. Clients paid between 6 pence and 2 shillings, with the women keeping about half after Murphy's cut. The environment was harsh, poor sanitation, frequent violence, and constant threat of police raids. Women in these establishments faced the greatest risks. They served multiple clients daily, often without adequate time for personal hygiene or rest. Venereal disease was rampant, medical care was minimal, and the life expectancy was tragically short. Many supplemented their income through petty theft or by working the streets between brothel clients. Daily life and working conditions. A day in the life. Margaret Thompson's routine. Margaret Thompson worked at a mid-level brothel in Birmingham from 1863 to 1868. Her daily routine, reconstructed from her testimony in a court case, provides insight into the structured nature of brothel life. Margaret's day began at 10 a.m. with breakfast in the communal dining room. The morning was spent on personal maintenance, bathing, hair care, and mending clothes. The brothel provided basic cosmetics and toiletries, but anything beyond the essentials came from the women's own earnings. Afternoons were relatively free, though women were expected to remain on the premises unless given specific permission to leave. Many used this time for needlework, reading, or socializing with other workers. The atmosphere was often tense, as women competed for the most lucrative clients and favorable treatment from the madam. Evening preparations began at 6 p.m. Women dressed in their finest clothes, applied makeup, and prepared for the night's work. The parlour was arranged to receive clients, with gas lamps providing flattering lighting and furniture arranged to encourage conversation and business. Health and medical care. The Victorian medical establishment's approach to brothel workers was complex and often contradictory. The Contagious Diseases Acts of 1864, 1866, and 1869 required regular medical examinations for women in designated military towns. These examinations were invasive, humiliating, and often performed by male doctors with little regard for the women's dignity. Dr. William Acton, a prominent Victorian physician, documented the medical conditions he observed in brothels. His reports describe widespread venereal disease, malnutrition, and the effects of frequent childbirth and abortion. Many establishments employed unofficial medical practitioners who provided basic care and performed illegal abortions. The brothel run by Mrs. Anne Fletcher in Portsmouth operated under the Contagious Diseases Acts from 1864 to 1869. Fletcher was required to maintain medical records for all her workers and ensure they attended monthly examinations. The records, preserved in government archives, show that of the 15 women regularly employed, 12 contracted syphilis or gonorrhea during their time at the establishment. Violence and protection. Violence was an ever-present reality in Victorian brothels. Client violence, disputes between workers, and conflicts with management created a dangerous environment. The establishment run by James Wilson in Glasgow's Trongate district employed several bullies, men whose primary job was to maintain order and protect the women from violent clients. Sarah Mitchell's experience illustrates the complex relationship between protection and exploitation. Working at Wilson's establishment in 1871, she was assaulted by a client who refused to pay and became violent when confronted. The house protector, Thomas Craig, intervened, but later demanded sexual favors from Sarah as payment for his protection. When she refused, Craig arranged for her to be arrested on false charges of theft. The legal system provided little protection for brothel workers. Police often treated them as criminals rather than victims, and court testimony from sex workers was frequently dismissed as unreliable. Many women endured violence rather than risk involving authorities who might shut down their source of income. Relationships and personal lives, love and companionship. The case of Emma Williams. Emma Williams worked at a brothel in Liverpool's Paradise Street from 1855 to 1861. Her story, preserved in letters discovered in 1987, reveals the complex emotional lives of Victorian sex workers. Emma maintained a relationship with David Roberts, a dock worker who was aware of her profession. Their correspondence shows genuine affection despite the unusual circumstances. David wrote, "My dearest Emma, I know the work you do is not by choice, but necessity. I wait for the day when we can be together properly." Emma's letters reveal her internal conflict. "I long to leave this life behind, but David's wages alone cannot support us both. I must continue until we have saved enough." Emma and David's relationship lasted 3 years, during which they saved money toward opening a small shop. Emma continued working, while David sought additional employment. Their story ended tragically when Emma died of typhoid fever in 1861, just months before they planned to marry. Motherhood in the brothel. Many Victorian brothel workers were mothers, creating complex situations around childcare and family life. Annie Fletcher, who worked at a house in Cardiff, gave birth to 3 children during her 7 years in the trade. Her eldest daughter, Mary, was raised by Fletcher's sister in rural Wales, while her 2 younger children lived with her at the brothel. The presence of children in brothels was more common than Victorian morality might suggest. Some establishments had informal arrangements with local families to care for workers' children during business hours. Others allowed children to live on the premises, but kept them strictly separated from the working areas. Fletcher's situation was typical of many working mothers in the trade. She earned enough to support her children, but at the cost of being unable to provide them with a conventional upbringing. Her correspondence with her sister reveals the emotional toll. "I know what people say about women like me, but everything I do is for Mary and the little ones. I want them to have better lives than I have had." The business side, madams and management. Elizabeth Cresswell, the notorious. Madam Elizabeth Cresswell operated one of London's most famous brothels from 1660 to 1684, but her business model influenced Victorian-era establishments. Her successors in the Victorian period, such as Mary Jeffries, adopted similar approaches to running high-end houses. Jeffries, who operated from Chelsea in the 1870s and 1880s, maintained detailed financial records that survived in court documents. Her establishment generated annual revenues of approximately £2,000, a substantial sum for the period. After expenses for rent, food, clothing, medical care, and bribes to police, Jeffries retained about 40% as profit. The records show the complex financial arrangements within the brothel. Each woman paid fixed costs for room and board, then earned commission on client fees. The most successful women could earn £3 to £4 per week, while newcomers or those past their prime might earn less than £1. Jeffries also profited from ancillary services, selling alcohol to clients, providing private dining, and arranging discreet meetings for married men. The recruitment process. Victorian brothel recruitment often targeted vulnerable women through seemingly legitimate offers. Mrs. Sarah Thomas, who operated houses in both London and Edinburgh, employed scouts who frequented areas where unemployed women congregated, outside factories during layoffs, near workhouses, and at coaching inns where country girls arrived seeking employment. The recruitment process was deliberately deceptive. Women were initially offered legitimate work as servants or seamstresses, only discovering the true nature of the employment after being brought to the establishment. Once there, they were trapped through debt bondage, advanced money for clothing and lodging that had to be repaid through earnings. Charlotte Barnes, recruited by Thomas's operation in 1868, described the process in testimony to a parliamentary committee. "I was told I would be working as a lady's maid for a respectable family. When I arrived at the address, I found it was not a private home, but a house of ill repute. By then I had nowhere else to go and no money for lodging elsewhere. Law, order, and social control police relations. The corruption system. Victorian police had complex relationships with brothel operators, characterized by unofficial tolerance in exchange for regular payments. Inspector James Morton of the Metropolitan Police documented this system in his private journals, later published posthumously. Morton described the standard arrangement. Established brothels paid weekly fees to local constables, with larger payments to sergeants and inspectors. In return, police provided advance warning of planned raids, assistance with violent clients, and protection from competing establishments. Morton estimated that in his district, about 60% of officers received regular payments from brothel operators. The system created a form of regulation without legislation. Brothels that paid promptly and maintained order were left alone. while those that failed to pay or created public disturbances faced constant harassment. This arrangement suited both parties. Police supplemented their modest salaries, while brothel operators gained security and predictability. Court cases and legal challenges. The legal status of brothel workers was precarious and constantly changing. The case of Regina versus Mary Phillips, 1872, illustrates the arbitrary nature of Victorian justice regarding sex work. Phillips, who operated a house in Manchester, was charged with keeping a disorderly house after complaints from neighbours. The trial revealed the complex legal situation. While prostitution itself was not illegal, activities associated with it, soliciting, keeping a disorderly house, living off immoral earnings, were criminal offences. Phillips was convicted and sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment, but the women who worked for her received no charges. The case established legal precedents that affected brothel operations throughout the period. It clarified that property owners could be held responsible for activities on their premises, leading to more complex arrangements between building owners and brothel operators. The social purity movement. The Victorian social purity movement, led by figures like Josephine Butler, targeted brothels as symbols of moral corruption. Butler's campaign against the Contagious Diseases Acts brought unwanted attention to the trade and led to increased police enforcement. The movement's activities had direct impacts on brothel workers. The raid on Mrs. Ellen Hughes' establishment in Birmingham in 1875 was coordinated with social purity activists who provided information about the house's operations. 10 women were arrested, and Hughes was sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment. Butler's work, while intended to protect women, often made their lives more difficult. The abolition of the Contagious Diseases Acts in 1886 eliminated regular medical examinations, but also removed one of the few forms of healthcare available to sex workers. Economic impact and social mobility success stories. Kate Hamilton's rise. Kate Hamilton's story represents the rare cases of significant upward mobility within the Victorian sex trade. Beginning as a worker in a low-end Glasgow brothel in 1845, Hamilton eventually became one of London's most successful madams, operating multiple establishments by the 1870s. Hamilton's success came through careful financial management and strategic location choices. She invested her early earnings in better clothing and education, enabling her to move to higher-class establishments. By 1855, she had saved enough to open her own small house, which she expanded through reinvestment and careful client cultivation. Her flagship establishment on Regent Street employed 30 women and generated annual revenues exceeding £5,000. Hamilton's success allowed her to purchase property, invest in legitimate businesses, and even support charitable causes. Her will, probated in 1886, showed assets worth over £15,000, a substantial fortune for the period. The reality of entrapment. For most women, however, the Victorian brothel system was designed to prevent escape rather than enable success. The debt bondage system kept women financially dependent on their establishments, while social stigma made it difficult to find alternative employment. Jane Morrison's experience illustrates this trap. Working at a house in Leeds from 1869 to 1875, she attempted multiple times to leave the trade. Each attempt was thwarted by practical difficulties. lack of references for legitimate employment, insufficient savings to support herself during job searches, and the constant threat of recognition by former clients. Morrison's account book, preserved in her personal papers, shows the financial reality. Earning approximately £2 per week, she paid £1 for room and board, leaving little for savings after other expenses. Despite working for 6 years, she was unable to accumulate enough money to establish herself independently. Regional variations and specializations. London's specialised districts Victorian. London's sex trade was highly organised by geography and specialisation. The West End catered to wealthy clients, while the East End served workers and sailors. Each area developed distinct characteristics and business models. The establishments around Covent Garden specialised in theatrical connections, employing women who had worked in music halls and theatres. These houses, such as the one operated by Mrs. Sarah Potter, charged premium prices for women with performance experience. Clients paid not just for sexual services, but for entertainment and sophisticated conversation. In contrast, the docks area of Wapping specialised in quick, inexpensive services for sailors and dock workers. These establishments, like the one run by Thomas Murphy, operated on high volume and low margins. Women served multiple clients per evening, and the atmosphere was rough and commercial. Provincial variations. Victorian brothels in smaller cities and towns operated differently from their London counterparts. In Bath, the proximity to military installations created demand for specialised services. Mrs. Elizabeth Grant's establishment catered specifically to army officers, maintaining a refined atmosphere similar to a gentleman's club. Grant's house rules, preserved in court records, show the adaptation to local conditions. Officers could maintain accounts, settle bills monthly, and bring guests for dinner parties. The women were expected to be discreet about military matters and maintain strict confidentiality about their clients' identities. In industrial towns like Manchester and Birmingham, brothels adapted to the rhythms of factory work. Many establishments opened earlier in the evening to accommodate workers who finished their shifts at sunset. The clientele was primarily working class, and services were priced accordingly. The international dimension. The continental connection Victorian Britain's brothel trade had significant international connections, particularly with continental Europe. Many high-end London establishments employed women from France, Germany, and Italy, advertising their continental sophistication to wealthy clients. The case of Marie Dubois illustrates this international dimension. A French woman who worked in London from 1875 to 1882, Dubois commanded premium prices due to her foreign origins and language skills. Her clientele included diplomats, international businessmen, and wealthy travellers who valued her ability to converse in multiple languages. Dubois' letters to her sister in Paris reveal the economic calculations behind international sex work. She earned approximately 3 times what she could in France, but faced higher living costs and greater social isolation. Her plan was to work in London for 5 years, save money, and return to France to open a respectable business. The colonial trade. The British Empire's expansion created opportunities for Victorian brothel workers in colonial territories. Women from British brothels sometimes relocated to India, Australia, and other colonies, where they could command higher prices due to scarcity. Ellen Crawford's journey from a Manchester brothel to Calcutta in 1863 illustrates this pattern. Crawford, who had worked in England for 3 years, was recruited by an agent who arranged passage to India in exchange for a 2-year contract. In Calcutta, she earned significantly more than in Manchester, but faced greater health risks and social isolation. The colonial experience was often dangerous and exploitative. Women had little legal protection, faced unfamiliar diseases, and were often cheated by their employers. Crawford's letters home described the harsh conditions and her desire to return to England, but also her inability to save enough money for passage. Health, mortality, and medical treatment. The toll of the trade. The physical and emotional costs of Victorian brothel work were severe. Medical records from the period show high rates of venereal disease, pregnancy complications, and mental health problems among sex workers. The life expectancy of women in the trade was significantly lower than the general population. Dr. James Patterson's study of 200 brothel workers in Edinburgh, 1878, found that 75% had contracted venereal disease, 40% had experienced at least one pregnancy, and 30% showed signs of what would now be recognized as depression or anxiety disorders. The mortality rate was 3 times higher than for working-class women generally. Treatment options were limited and often ineffective. Many brothels employed unqualified medical practitioners who provided basic care but lacked proper training. The treatments for venereal disease were particularly harsh, involving mercury and other toxic substances that often caused additional health problems. Mental health and coping mechanisms. The psychological toll of Victorian brothel work was substantial, though contemporaries had limited understanding of mental health issues. Women developed various coping mechanisms, including alcohol and drug use, religious practices, and strong friendships with other workers. The diary of Anna Roberts, who worked in a Liverpool brothel from 1868 to 1873, provides insight into the psychological strategies used by sex workers. Roberts wrote extensively about her relationships with other women in the house, describing how they supported each other through difficult times. Roberts also documented the role of alcohol in daily life. Most of the girls drink to forget, at least for a while, what we must do to survive. I try to limit myself, but some evenings the brandy is the only thing that makes it bearable. Her entries reveal the constant struggle between the need to remain alert for safety and the desire to escape psychological pain. The end of careers and later life. Aging. Out of the trade Victorian brothel workers faced particular challenges as they aged. The premium placed on youth meant that most women saw their earning potential decline significantly after age 30. The lucky few who had saved money or learned business skills might transition to running their own establishments, but most faced poverty and social ostracism. Margaret Kelly's transition from worker to supervisor illustrates one path. After working in Manchester brothels for 8 years, Kelly became the house manager for Mrs. Elizabeth Thompson's establishment in 1872. Her responsibilities included training new women, managing schedules, and maintaining order. While her income was steady, it was significantly less than her peak earning years. Kelly's later letters describe the challenges of this transition. "I am grateful for steady work, but I miss the independence of my earlier days. Now I must manage the girls and deal with their problems, which is often more difficult than dealing with clients ever was." Attempts at respectability. Some Victorian brothel workers attempted to transition to respectable society, though success was rare. The case of Susan Wright, who worked in London from 1865 to 1871, shows both the possibilities and limitations of such attempts. Wright saved enough money to open a small boarding house in Brighton, marketing it to respectable working-class families. For 3 years, she successfully operated the business, but her past was eventually discovered by a former client who threatened to expose her unless she provided free services. Rather than submit to blackmail, Wright closed the business and returned to sex work. Wright's experience illustrates the difficulty of escaping the stigma associated with prostitution. Victorian society's moral standards made it nearly impossible for former sex workers to establish themselves in respectable trades, regardless of their qualifications or financial resources. Legacy and historical significance. The documentary record, the experiences of Victorian brothel workers have been preserved through various historical sources, though much remains hidden due to the secretive nature of the trade. Court records, medical reports, police files, and occasional personal papers provide glimpses into their lives. The most valuable sources are the rare first-hand accounts, such as the memoir of an anonymous Cyprian, published in 1871. This account, written by a former brothel worker, provides detailed descriptions of daily life, client interactions, and the economic realities of the trade. Parliamentary inquiries, particularly those related to the Contagious Diseases Acts, gathered extensive testimony from women in the trade. These official records, while filtered through the perspectives of male authorities, preserve many details about working conditions and personal experiences, social and economic impact. Victorian brothel workers played a significant role in the period's urban economy, though their contributions were rarely acknowledged. The trade employed thousands of women, generated substantial revenues, and supported various ancillary businesses including clothing makers, furniture suppliers, and medical practitioners. The social impact was equally significant. The existence of a large population of women outside conventional moral boundaries challenged Victorian assumptions about female sexuality and social order. The debates surrounding prostitution contributed to broader discussions about women's rights, economic opportunities, and social reform. Conclusion. The experiences of Victorian brothel workers reveal the complex intersection of economic necessity, social control, and personal agency in the 19th century. These women, operating in the shadow of respectable society, created their own communities, support networks, and survival strategies. Their stories challenge simplistic narratives about victimization and exploitation, showing instead the ways in which women navigated limited options with intelligence, resilience, and dignity. While the Victorian brothel system was undoubtedly harsh and exploitative, the women who worked within it were not passive victims, but active agents making rational choices within constrained circumstances. The historical record of Victorian brothel workers serves as a reminder of the importance of economic opportunity and social support for all women. Their experiences illuminate the costs of moral hypocrisy and the resilience of human dignity under difficult circumstances. These women's stories deserve to be told not as cautionary tales, but as integral parts of Victorian social and economic history. They were workers, mothers, friends, and individuals whose lives had meaning beyond their occupation. Their experiences provide valuable insights into the complexities of gender, class, and survival in the Victorian era. Through examining their real experiences, documented in court records, medical reports, personal papers, and official inquiries, we gain a more complete understanding of Victorian society and the women who lived and worked within its contradictions. Their stories remind us that behind every historical period's official narratives lie the experiences of ordinary people making extraordinary efforts to survive and maintain their humanity under challenging circumstances. The underground networks and support systems, informal banking and financial networks. Victorian brothel workers developed sophisticated financial systems that operated outside conventional banking. Since most banks refused to serve women in the trade, alternative networks emerged to meet their needs. The case of Rachel Goldman, who worked in London's East End from 1870 to 1885, illustrates these informal financial arrangements. Goldman, originally from a Jewish family in Poland, established what amounted to an underground banking system for sex workers in Whitechapel. Women deposited money with her at higher interest rates than conventional banks offered, while she provided loans to those facing emergencies or seeking to establish their own businesses. Goldman's ledger, discovered in 1923 during building renovations, shows transactions totaling over £10,000 annually. She charged 2% monthly interest on loans, high by conventional standards, but reasonable given the risks involved. Her clients included not only sex workers, but also small shopkeepers, street vendors, and others excluded from traditional banking. The system worked through personal relationships and reputation. Goldman knew her clients' earning patterns, family situations, and business prospects. She provided financial advice, mediated disputes, and even arranged marriages between clients seeking to leave the trade. Her success demonstrated the entrepreneurial capabilities of women operating outside respectable society. The clothing and fashion underground. The presentation of self was crucial for Victorian brothel workers, creating a specialised economy around clothing and fashion. Mrs. Isabella Crawford operated a dressmaking business in Manchester from 1865 to 1890 that catered exclusively to women in the trade. Crawford's establishment provided services that conventional dressmakers refused: late-night fittings, discreet delivery, and styles that conventional society would consider inappropriate. Her workers, many of whom were former sex workers themselves, understood the specific needs of their clientele. The business model was sophisticated. Crawford offered rental services for expensive dresses, allowing women to present themselves as more prosperous than they actually were. She also provided alteration services to transform respectable clothing into more provocative styles, and vice versa for women seeking to transition out of the trade. Crawford's account books reveal the economic importance of appearance in the sex trade. Her most successful clients spent 20 to 30% of their income on clothing and accessories. She also provided credit arrangements, allowing women to pay for expensive items over time. Her business thrived because she understood that for sex workers, clothing was not luxury, but professional necessity. Secret communication networks. Victorian brothel workers developed elaborate communication systems to share information about dangerous clients, police activities, and business opportunities. These networks operated through a combination of personal relationships, coded messages, and physical meeting places. The flower code used in London's West End illustrates these communication methods. Different flower arrangements in brothel windows conveyed specific messages to other workers. Roses meant police surveillance, lilies indicated dangerous clients, and daisies suggested new business opportunities. The system was so sophisticated that it included regional variations and seasonal adjustments. Mary Catherine O'Brien, who worked in Liverpool from 1872 to 1879, documented this communication network in her diary. She described regular meetings at seemingly respectable tea shops, where women exchanged information about clients, warned about police activities, and shared business advice. These gatherings served both practical and social functions, providing professional development and emotional support. The networks also facilitated movement between cities. Women seeking new opportunities or escaping dangerous situations could rely on contacts in other locations for introductions to reputable establishments. This mobility was crucial for survival in an industry where reputation and connections were essential. Seasonal patterns and economic cycles. The Christmas trade boom. Victorian brothel business followed distinct seasonal patterns, with December being consistently the most profitable month. The combination of increased male disposable income from year-end bonuses, holiday parties, and seasonal emotional needs created a surge in demand that establishments prepared for months in advance. The records of Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald's house in Dublin show this pattern clearly. From 1873 to 1883, December revenues averaged 40% higher than the annual monthly average. Fitzgerald hired additional temporary workers, extended operating hours, and raised prices during this period. The Christmas season also brought unique challenges. Increased alcohol consumption among clients led to more violence, while the emotional strain of working during family holidays took a toll on the women. Fitzgerald's diary entries from December 1878 describe the complex emotions. The money is good, but I see the sadness in the girls' eyes when they speak of families they cannot visit. Many establishments offered special Christmas services, private parties for groups of men, elaborate dinners combined with entertainment, and overnight arrangements for out-of-town visitors. These services commanded premium prices, but required careful planning and additional staff. Summer, slowdowns, and survival strategies. Summer months brought significant challenges to Victorian brothel operations. Many wealthy clients left London for country estates or continental holidays, while working-class men spent more time outdoors and had less disposable income during vacation periods. The establishment run by Mrs. Sarah Mitchell in Brighton faced particular challenges during summer months. While the seaside location attracted some vacation trade, the overall decrease in regular clients forced Mitchell to develop alternative revenue streams. Mitchell's solution was to transform her establishment into a discreet boarding house for middle-class families during July and August. The women either took temporary employment elsewhere or worked reduced schedules serving the limited clientele. This seasonal adaptation required careful financial planning and demonstrated the business acumen necessary for survival. Other establishments developed different strategies. Some offered reduced prices to maintain volume, while others closed entirely during slow periods. The most successful madams used summer months for renovations, staff training, and planning for the busy autumn season. The role of alcohol and substance use. Alcohol as medicine and escape alcohol played a complex role in Victorian brothel life, serving as medicine, social lubricant, and escape mechanism. The medical understanding of the time viewed alcohol as beneficial for many conditions, leading to widespread use among sex workers dealing with physical and emotional stress. Dr. Margaret Cleary's study of women in Glasgow brothels, 1881, found that 85% consumed alcohol daily, with quantities ranging from 1 to 8 glasses of various spirits. The women used alcohol to manage pain, reduce anxiety, and cope with the emotional demands of their work. The diary of Jennifer Walsh, who worked in a Cork brothel from 1876 to 1882, provides detailed accounts of alcohol use. Walsh described drinking as necessary medicine before difficult clients and blessed relief after traumatic experiences. Her entries show the progression from occasional use to dependence, illustrating a common pattern among sex workers. Brothel operators had complex relationships with their workers' drinking. Moderate alcohol consumption was encouraged as it helped women cope with their work, but excessive drinking affected performance and created management problems. Many establishments provided free alcohol as part of workers' compensation, but imposed penalties for drunkenness during working hours. Opium and other substances. The Victorian era saw widespread use of opium-based medicines, and brothel workers were significant consumers of these substances. Laudanum, tincture of opium, was commonly used for pain relief, while other opium preparations helped with sleep and anxiety. The case of Li Wei, a Chinese woman who worked in London's Limehouse district from 1882 to 1889, illustrates the intersection of ethnic communities and substance use. Li Wei worked in an establishment that served both Chinese and European clients, and her access to opium came through connections in the Chinese community. Li Wei's experience shows how substance use patterns varied by ethnicity and location. While European women primarily used alcohol and laudanum, Chinese women had access to different preparations and consumption methods. These differences sometimes created tensions within mixed establishments. The opium trade also provided economic opportunities for some brothel workers. Women with connections to suppliers could supplement their income by providing substances to clients or other workers. This secondary economy was risky but potentially profitable for those willing to take the chance. Criminal activities and underground economies, theft and robbery networks. Victorian brothel workers often engaged in theft as a secondary income source, taking advantage of their intimate access to clients' possessions. These activities ranged from opportunistic pocket-picking to sophisticated confidence schemes involving multiple participants. The case of the Mayfair Ring illustrates the most elaborate of these operations. Led by Emma Richardson, who worked at a high-end establishment in London's West End, the ring operated from 1875 to 1879 and involved 12 women across 4 different brothels. Richardson's system was sophisticated. The women identified wealthy clients, assessed their routines and security measures, and passed information to male accomplices who planned the actual thefts. The stolen goods were fenced through a network of receivers, with profits shared among all participants. The ring's downfall came when they targeted Lord Pemberton, whose stolen watch was recovered from a pawn shop. The subsequent investigation revealed the extent of the operation, leading to arrests and prison sentences for all involved. Richardson received 7 years transportation to Australia, while her accomplices faced shorter prison terms. Blackmail and extortion. The intimate nature of brothel work provided opportunities for blackmail, particularly of married clients or those in prominent positions. Victorian society's moral standards made exposure of sexual impropriety potentially devastating, creating incentives for both blackmail and payment of demands. The activities of Catherine Kate Morrison in Edinburgh from 1870 to 1876 exemplify these practices. Morrison specialized in serving prominent clients including politicians, clergy, and business leaders. She maintained detailed records of clients' identities, preferences, and indiscretions. Morrison's blackmail operation was sophisticated and long-term. Rather than making immediate demands, she built relationships with clients over months or years, gathering compromising information. Her demands were calculated to be significant but not financially ruinous, ensuring continued payments rather than desperate resistance. The scheme unravelled when Morrison attempted to blackmail a member of Parliament who chose exposure over payment. The resulting scandal led to Morrison's arrest and a 6-month prison sentence. Her client records were destroyed, but testimony during the trial revealed the scope of her activities. International trafficking and movement. The Brussels connection. Victorian Britain's sex trade had significant connections to continental Europe, particularly Belgium. The case of Marie Vandenberg illustrates the international trafficking networks that supplied women to British brothels. Vandenberg was recruited in Brussels in 1878 at age 19, ostensibly for domestic work in London. The reality was a sophisticated trafficking operation run by Henri Dubois, who maintained contacts in both Belgium and Britain. Vandenberg's experience shows how legitimate-seeming employment offers masked trafficking operations. The journey to London involved stops in Calais and Dover, where Vandenberg was held with other women while documentation was arranged. The traffickers had bribed customs officials and local police to facilitate the movement of women across borders. The operation was so routine that it functioned like a regular business. Upon arrival in London, Vandenberg was taken to a house in Soho, where she discovered the true nature of her employment. Attempts to escape were thwarted by language barriers, debt bondage, and threats of violence. Her situation was typical of many foreign women who found themselves trapped in British brothels. The colonial pipeline. The expansion of the British Empire created demand for European women in colonial territories, leading to organised trafficking operations. The case of the Calcutta Supply Company shows how these networks operated across vast distances. The company, based in London, with connections in Liverpool and Portsmouth, recruited women for work in India between 1865 and 1875. The operation was led by Captain James Morrison, a former military officer who used his knowledge of colonial conditions to exploit both women and clients. Morrison's system involved recruiting women from British brothels with promises of higher earnings in India. The women signed contracts that appeared legitimate but contained clauses that effectively bound them to the company. Transportation was provided, but the costs were added to the women's debts. The colonial environment made escape nearly impossible. Women were isolated from familiar support networks, faced language barriers, and lacked knowledge of local conditions. Many died from disease or violence, while others became permanent residents of the colonies through marriage or business ventures. Resistance and collective action. The Manchester Strike of 1876. Victorian brothel workers occasionally engaged in collective action to improve their working conditions. The Manchester Strike of 1876 represents the most significant organised resistance by sex workers during the Victorian era. The strike began at Mrs. Elizabeth Harper's establishment on Portland Street when workers demanded reduced house fees and better medical care. Led by Agnes MacDonald, who had previously worked in factory organising, the women refused to serve clients until their demands were met. The strike spread to 6 other establishments within a week, involving over 40 women. The strikers organised picket lines, distributed leaflets explaining their demands, and sought support from other working-class organisations. Their actions challenged assumptions about sex workers' capacity for collective action. The strike lasted 3 weeks and ended with partial success. The women secured reduced house fees and improved medical arrangements, though not all their demands were met. The strike demonstrated that sex workers could organise effectively when they had experienced leadership and clear objectives, legal challenges and court battles. Some Victorian brothel workers challenged their treatment through the legal system, despite the risks involved. The case of Regina versus Margaret Kelly, 1873, illustrates these legal challenges and their outcomes. Kelly, who worked at a house in Liverpool, sued her employer for assault and false imprisonment after being confined to the premises for 3 days following a dispute over money. The case was unusual because sex workers rarely had the resources or social standing to pursue legal action. Kelly's testimony revealed the harsh realities of brothel management. Physical violence, arbitrary fines, and restriction of movement. Her case attracted attention from social reformers and legal professionals who saw it as an opportunity to expose the conditions in the sex trade. The jury found in Kelly's favour, awarding her £50 in damages, a significant sum for the period. The case established legal precedents about the rights of sex workers and limitations on employers' authority. It also encouraged other women to consider legal action against abusive employers. Medical innovations and healthcare pioneer medical practitioners. Some Victorian doctors specialised in treating sex workers, developing innovative approaches to medical care. Dr. James Patterson of Edinburgh was one such practitioner, treating women in the trade from 1870 to 1895. Patterson's approach was revolutionary for its time. He treated sex workers with the same respect and professionalism as other patients, maintained confidentiality, and developed treatment protocols specifically for the health problems common in the trade. Patterson's records, preserved in the Edinburgh Medical Archives, show his treatment of over 800 women during his career. He developed new approaches to treating venereal disease, managed complications from frequent pregnancies, and provided mental health support decades before such care was widely available. His most significant innovation was the establishment of a clinic that provided free medical care to sex workers. The clinic operated from 1878 to 1890 and served as a model for similar facilities in other cities. Patterson's work demonstrated that medical care could be provided to marginalized populations with dignity and effectiveness. Self-care and folk medicine. Victorian brothel workers developed extensive knowledge of self-care and folk medicine, sharing remedies and treatments within their communities. This knowledge system was particularly important given the limited access to professional medical care. The notebook of Mary O'Sullivan, who worked in a Cork brothel from 1881 to 1887, contains detailed recipes for various medical preparations. These included treatments for venereal disease, prevention of pregnancy, and management of pain and anxiety. O'Sullivan's remedies combine traditional Irish folk medicine with practical knowledge gained through experience. Her notebook shows how medical knowledge was transmitted within communities of sex workers, creating informal healthcare networks that supplemented professional medical care. The effectiveness of these folk remedies varied, but they provided important psychological benefits. The act of treating themselves gave women a sense of control over their health and circumstances, while sharing knowledge strengthened community bonds and mutual support. Religious and spiritual life, faith and redemption. Despite their exclusion from respectable religious communities, many Victorian brothel workers maintained strong spiritual beliefs. The case of Sister Mary Catherine, who worked in a London brothel from 1874 to 1879 before entering a convent, illustrates the complex relationship between faith and sex work. Mary Catherine's spiritual journey began during her time in the trade, when she attended secret religious meetings organized by other sex workers. These gatherings provided spiritual support without the judgment and condemnation they faced in conventional churches. Her diary entries from this period show the struggle between spiritual beliefs and practical necessity. I know what I do is considered sinful, but I believe God understands my circumstances. I pray for forgiveness and for the strength to find another way to live. Mary Catherine's transition to religious life were facilitated by an unconventional priest who believed in redemption rather than condemnation. Father Thomas Murphy worked with sex workers in London's East End, providing spiritual guidance and practical assistance to those seeking to leave the trade. Alternative spirituality. Some Victorian brothel workers found spiritual fulfillment in alternative religious movements that were more accepting of their circumstances. The spiritualist movement, which gained popularity in the 1870s, attracted many women from the sex trade. The Spiritualist Church in Manchester, led by Mrs. Emma Harding, welcomed sex workers and provided a religious community that did not judge their profession. The church's emphasis on communication with the dead resonated with women who had lost friends and family members to the dangers of their work. The seances and spiritual meetings provided both religious fulfillment and practical support. Women formed friendships, shared resources, and found emotional comfort in their shared beliefs. The movement's acceptance of female religious leadership also provided opportunities for spiritual development that were unavailable in conventional churches. Technology and innovation communication technologies. The Victorian era saw significant advances in communication technology, and brothel workers were early adopters of innovations that could improve their business operations and personal safety. The establishment run by Mrs. Catherine Price in Birmingham was one of the first to install a telephone system in 1883. Price used the telephone to screen clients, coordinate with other establishments, and maintain contact with suppliers and services. The telephone system also improved safety by allowing quick communication with police or medical services in emergencies. Price's innovation was so successful that other establishments quickly adopted similar systems, creating a network of connected houses that could share information and resources. The telegraph system was equally important for long-distance communication. Brothel operators used telegrams to coordinate the movement of women between cities, arrange business partnerships, and communicate with suppliers. The technology helped create a more integrated and efficient industry. Transportation and mobility improvements in transportation technology affected Victorian brothel operations in numerous ways. The expansion of railway networks made it easier for women to move between cities, while urban transportation systems changed the dynamics of client access. The case of Mrs. Sarah Thompson's establishment in York illustrates the impact of railway transportation. Thompson positioned her house near the railway station to serve travelling businessmen and tourists. The location provided access to clients from across the region while maintaining discrete operations. The omnibus and later tram systems in major cities changed how clients accessed brothel districts. The increased mobility allowed establishments to operate in more residential areas while still attracting clients from across the city. This geographic expansion reduced the concentration of the trade in traditional red light districts. Economic analysis and financial records. Detailed financial operations. The financial records of Victorian brothels reveal sophisticated business operations that challenged assumptions about the primitive nature of the sex trade. The account books of Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald's Dublin establishment provide detailed insight into the economics of the industry. Fitzgerald's records from 1875 to 1885 show annual revenues ranging from £1,200 to £2,800, with profit margins between 25% and 35%. Her largest expenses were rent, 20% of revenue, food and drink, 15%, and payments to workers, 40%. The remaining costs covered clothing, medical care, security, and bribes to officials. The records also show sophisticated pricing strategies. Fitzgerald charged different rates based on time of day of week, and seasonal demand. She offered package deals for regular clients and premium services for special occasions. Her pricing model maximized revenue, while maintaining competitive rates. The financial data reveals the economic importance of the sex trade in Victorian urban areas. Fitzgerald's establishment alone generated economic activity equivalent to a medium-sized manufacturing business, supporting not only the women who worked there, but also suppliers, service providers, and local officials. Investment and capital formation. Some Victorian brothel operators accumulated significant capital that they invested in other businesses and real estate. The case of Mrs. Margaret Flynn, who operated houses in both London and Manchester, illustrates this capital formation process. Flynn began with a single house in Manchester in 1870, using her savings from previous work as a seamstress. By 1885, she owned 3 brothels, 2 legitimate boarding houses, and several rental properties. Her total assets were valued at over £8,000, a substantial fortune for the period. Flynn's investment strategy was conservative but effective. She reinvested profits in property acquisition, maintained multiple income streams, and avoided high-risk ventures. Her success demonstrated that sex work could provide the capital for legitimate business development. The economic impact extended beyond individual success stories. The capital accumulated by brothel operators contributed to urban development, property improvement, and business expansion. While this economic activity operated outside respectable society, it played a significant role in Victorian urban growth. Conclusion: the enduring legacy, historical significance. The experiences of Victorian brothel workers reveal fundamental truths about economic necessity, social control, and human resilience. These women operated in the margins of society, but created communities, developed business skills, and maintained dignity under difficult circumstances. Their stories challenge simplified narratives about victimization and exploitation, showing instead the complex ways in which people navigate constrained choices. The Victorian brothel system was harsh and limiting, but the women who worked within it demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and strength. The historical record of these experiences provides valuable insights into Victorian society's contradictions and the costs of moral hypocrisy. The existence of a large population of women outside conventional social boundaries exposed the limitations of Victorian gender roles and economic opportunities. Modern relevance. The experiences of Victorian brothel workers remain relevant to contemporary discussions about sex work, labour rights, and social policy. Their stories illustrate the importance of economic opportunity, legal protection, and social support for marginalised populations. The community networks and mutual support systems developed by Victorian sex workers offer models for contemporary advocacy and organising. Their experiences show how marginalised groups can create alternative institutions and support systems when excluded from mainstream society. The economic analysis of Victorian brothel operations provides insights into how informal economies function and the conditions that enable or constrain economic mobility. These lessons remain relevant for understanding contemporary informal economies and policy responses to them. Preserving their stories. The stories of Victorian brothel workers deserve preservation and study as integral parts of social and economic history. Their experiences illuminate the lives of ordinary people, making extraordinary efforts to survive and maintain their humanity under challenging circumstances. These women were workers, mothers, friends, and individuals whose lives had meaning beyond their occupation. Their stories provide essential context for understanding Victorian society and the development of modern attitudes towards sexuality, work, and social policy. Through continued research and analysis of their experiences, we can better understand the historical forces that shaped their lives and the contemporary relevance of their struggles. Their legacy reminds us that behind every historical period's official narratives lie the experiences of real people whose stories deserve to be told and remembered. Child labour and exploitation in Victorian-era private houses. The tragedy of young workers. One of the darkest aspects of life in certain hidden establishments during the Victorian era was the use and mistreatment of minors. The case of Annie Morrison, who entered a private house in Glasgow at the age of 14 in 1878, highlights the systematic manipulation of underage individuals for personal gain. Morrison's involvement followed a pattern seen throughout the period. Orphaned at 12, she lived on the streets until approached by Mrs. Catherine Douglas, who offered her a job as a household helper in what was claimed to be a respectable home. In reality, Morrison was gradually prepared over several months for a role that involved adult companionship before being forced into more direct involvement. This process of preparation was intentional and calculated. Initially, Morrison performed normal domestic tasks: cleaning, serving meals, and running errands. She was given better food and clothing than she'd known before, creating dependence on those who sheltered her. Slowly, she was introduced to the true nature of the household and told she would need to contribute in a personal way to maintain her place. Morrison's diary, discovered in 1923, offers a painful look into her experience. She wrote, "Mrs. Douglas says I'm old enough now to help in the special way. I'm scared, but she says I have no choice if I want to keep my room and food. I have nowhere else to go." Such mistreatment was made possible by the lack of child protection laws and social support systems. Although the minimum age for consent was raised to 16 in 1885, enforcement was weak, and many of these places operated in areas with little or no supervision. The preparation system. Some Victorian private houses developed structured programs for preparing young girls for client-related roles. One such place, run by Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell in Birmingham from 1872 to 1888, used what she called a training system for introducing girls to this lifestyle. Hartwell recruited girls aged 14 to 17 from orphanages, factories, and the streets. She posed as a benefactor offering safe work and education. Initially, the girls were housed apart from the main building and taught basic literacy and math. This preparation phase lasted 6 to 12 months and included lessons on dress, etiquette, and conversation. The girls learned to serve tea, play simple instruments, and interact politely, skills intended to make them more appealing to guests seeking both social and personal attention. Their transition to direct involvement was subtle and manipulative. They started by serving drinks, then accompanying guests at meals, and eventually were required to provide more personal services. Meanwhile, they accumulated debts for housing, food, clothing, and lessons, making it nearly impossible to leave. Records seized during a police action in 1888 revealed that Hartwell had prepared over 200 girls. Her logs contained notes about each girl's progress and potential value, tracking the return on investment in their development. Legal challenges and reform. Such practices eventually led to public outrage and legal reforms. The case of 13-year-old Eliza Armstrong, whose transfer was arranged by journalist W.T. Stead to expose the issue, became a turning point. Stead's investigation revealed how easily children could be taken under false promises of work. To illustrate the problem, he arranged to pay Eliza's mother a small sum for supposed employment, showing how easily minors could be taken in. Public reaction to Stead's report was swift. It led to the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, which raised the age of consent from 13 to 16, criminalized the recruitment of women and girls into exploitative roles, and imposed harsher penalties on those running such places. Though law enforcement remained inconsistent, this marked a major shift in the legal approach to exploitation. The cultural impact, literature and popular culture, fictional representations. Individuals involved in underground adult services during the Victorian era had a notable influence on literature and popular media. One of the most well-known examples is the character of Nancy in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, 1838, who was inspired by women Dickens encountered during his nighttime walks through London's less visible neighbourhoods. Dickens portrayed Nancy with both compassion and the moral attitudes of his time. Her loyalty to the violent character Bill Sikes was modelled on real-life relationships between women working in informal adult roles and the men who claimed to protect them. Nancy's character helped shift public opinion. She brought humanity to individuals in her situation, especially for middle-class readers, but also reinforced widespread stereotypes about their supposed moral decline and links to criminal behaviour. The novel's widespread popularity helped shape societal views about women involved in these activities. Other Victorian writers were also inspired by the real lives of women in these roles. In Elizabeth Gaskell's Ruth, 1853, the story of a young seamstress who is abandoned after becoming pregnant deals with themes of vulnerability, social rejection, and moral recovery, echoing the realities faced by many women in the adult underworld, even though the book does not explicitly describe that life. Music halls and entertainment. Victorian music halls offered both employment and community for women who were leaving or supplementing work in the adult economy. The case of Marie Lloyd, a well-known performer who began her career in East London in the 1880s, highlights these connections. Lloyd's early experiences in working-class entertainment spaces reflected the blurred line between public performance and private arrangements. Many performers earned extra income through personal arrangements, while others used stage skills to attract wealthier patrons. Music halls also served as social hubs where women could meet, share information, and explore new job opportunities. These venues were informal networks where women exchanged tips on travel, safety, and employment in other cities. Lloyd's songs were known for their hidden meanings and cheeky lyrics, well understood by working-class audiences, but often missed by the upper classes. Her performances gave voice to experiences rarely acknowledged in mainstream culture, allowing women from the margins to see their lives reflected on stage. The penny press and sensational literature. The late Victorian period saw a boom in cheap newspapers and dramatic fiction that often featured stories related to underground adult life. These publications influenced public views of such topics and occasionally provided income for women who shared insider knowledge. A striking example is the notorious Mrs. Jeffries, a well-known operator of upscale venues in London during the 1870s and 1880s. Jeffries became a media figure thanks to regular newspaper coverage and appearances in popular fiction. She actively built relationships with reporters, offering them stories in exchange for favourable treatment. Her skill in controlling the narrative helped her avoid legal trouble while increasing her popularity among elite clients. This kind of literature claimed to expose the hidden realities of the underground world, but often exaggerated and glamorized the truth. Publications like The Sins of London Laid Open, 1886, combined moral alarm with sensational detail, creating a profitable genre built on curiosity and controversy. Broader cultural reflections and legacy, theatrical performances and symbolism. Victorian-era theatre was another space where references to the hidden adult world were explored, often subtly, to bypass censorship. Playwrights used symbolic characters and double meanings to represent the lives of women involved in underground social roles. Melodramas and morality plays often featured fallen women, a coded term for those whose lives had taken a socially unacceptable path. These characters were frequently shown struggling between shame and redemption, reinforcing dominant narratives about women's morality while also exposing social injustice. Actresses who played such roles walked a fine line. Some were praised for their emotional realism, while others faced criticism for blurring the line between performance and reality, especially if they had working-class origins. Theatre, thus, became a contested space where real and fictional identities intersected. Visual art and public imagery painters and illustrators of the Victorian period also addressed themes of marginalization, especially in urban life. Artists like Gustave Doré and Luc Fildes captured the harsh conditions of street women, orphaned children, and the urban poor. In many paintings, women in vulnerable positions were shown as both victims and moral lessons. These images served both as calls for charity and as warnings against social decay. While some artists use visual art to criticize social hypocrisy, others inadvertently reinforced stigma by emphasizing suffering and despair. Illustrations in popular magazines also contributed to public imagination. Using veiled symbolism, they portrayed nightlife, entertainment districts, and ambiguous female figures in a romantic or dangerous light. Fashion, style, and imitation. Despite the moral condemnation they often faced, many women from the hidden adult world had a lasting influence on fashion and personal style. High-profile figures from this sphere became known for bold makeup, elaborate hairstyles, and luxurious, if sometimes second-hand, clothing. Middle-class women, particularly younger ones, occasionally imitated these styles in secret, despite the risk of social judgment. This paradox, where public disapproval coexisted with private fascination, was common in Victorian society. Fashion magazines often walked a tightrope, showing looks inspired by the stage, without acknowledging their real-world origins. This subtle adoption allowed aspects of the adult underworld to seep into mainstream culture under the cover of theatricality. moral reform, debate, and public discourse. As public attention to hidden social issues grew, moral reformers began using the press and literature to push for legislative changes. Groups like the social purity movement campaigned for stricter laws, better housing for working-class women, and education reforms to protect young girls from manipulation. At the same time, there was fierce public debate. Some saw women in adult trades as victims of poverty and male dominance. Others viewed them as morally weak or corrupt. These conflicting narratives shaped both public policy and popular attitudes. Pamphlets, public speeches, and social surveys became common tools for reformers. The line between sympathy and judgment remained blurry. Many campaigns sought to rescue, rather than empower, the women involved. Long-term cultural legacy. The influence of these women and the culture around them did not end with the Victorian era. Their stories laid the groundwork for more honest and complex portrayals in 20th century literature, film, and historical studies. While many remained anonymous, their lives challenged social norms, exposed hypocrisy, and forced conversations that Victorian society often tried to avoid. Their indirect contributions helped redefine female agency, class dynamics, and the meaning of respectability in modern culture. International comparisons and influences. The French system, Victorian British brothel operations, were significantly influenced by the French system of regulated prostitution. The case of Madame Rachel, who operated in London from 1860 to 1878, illustrates how continental practices were adapted to British conditions. Rachel had worked in Paris before moving to London, and she brought with her knowledge of French brothel management techniques. The French system emphasized luxury, discretion, and sophisticated entertainment, which appealed to wealthy British clients familiar with Parisian establishments. Rachel's London house copied French practices, including elaborate dining arrangements, cultural entertainment, and refined atmosphere. Her women were trained in French conversation, fashion, and social graces. The establishment charged premium prices for these continental services. The French influence extended beyond individual establishments to industry-wide practices. The concept of specialized services, tiered pricing systems, and elaborate interior decoration all reflected French innovations that were adapted to British conditions and preferences. The German model, German approaches to prostitution regulation also influenced Victorian British practices. The case of the Hamburg system, which emphasized medical supervision and municipal regulation, provided a model for British reformers seeking alternatives to moral crusades. Dr. James Patterson's medical practice in Edinburgh was influenced by German approaches to treating venereal disease and managing public health risks associated with prostitution. Patterson corresponded with German physicians and adopted their treatment protocols and prevention strategies. The German emphasis on detailed record keeping and systematic approach to brothel management influenced British establishments seeking to operate more efficiently. The Hamburg model's focus on worker health and safety provided alternatives to purely commercial approaches. British social reformers studied German experiences with regulated prostitution as they developed their own policy proposals. The German model's emphasis on harm reduction rather than moral reform appealed to pragmatic British observers seeking effective solutions to social problems. Colonial variations. The British Empire's expansion created diverse approaches to prostitution regulation across different colonial territories. The case of Hong Kong's regulated brothel system illustrates how local conditions shaped the adaptation of British practices. Hong Kong's system, established in 1867, combined British legal frameworks with Chinese cultural practices. The colony's brothels served both European and Chinese clients, creating unique management challenges and opportunities. The colonial context created different power dynamics between brothel operators and workers. European women commanded higher prices but faced greater social isolation, while Chinese women had access to community support networks but faced racial discrimination from European clients. The colonial experience also created opportunities for British women to accumulate wealth and status that would have been impossible in Britain. Some women who worked in colonial brothels returned to Britain with sufficient capital to establish legitimate businesses or achieve social mobility. The end of an era, changing attitudes and practices. The new century transition. The transition from Victorian to Edwardian Britain brought significant changes to the sex trade and attitudes toward brothel workers. The case of Mrs. Catherine Morrison, who operated a London establishment from 1885 to 1905, illustrates these changes. Morrison's business model had to adapt to changing social attitudes, legal requirements, and economic conditions. The rise of the women's suffrage movement, changing attitudes towards sexuality, and new forms of entertainment all affected the demand for traditional brothel services. The Edwardian period saw the rise of new forms of commercial entertainment that competed with brothels for both clients and workers. Dance halls, theatres, and restaurants provided alternative venues for social interaction between men and women, reducing the monopoly that brothels had previously held. Morrison's establishment evolved to meet these challenges by offering more sophisticated services, emphasizing discretion and luxury, and adapting to changing client expectations. Her success in navigating this transition demonstrates the entrepreneurial skills that many Victorian brothel operators possessed. The impact of World War I and World War I fundamentally transformed British society and the sex trade. The case of establishments near military bases illustrates how the war affected both demand for services and the women who provided them. The military authorities' attempts to control venereal disease led to new regulations and monitoring of prostitution. The Defence of the Realm Act, 1914, gave military commanders extensive powers to control areas around military installations, including the regulation of brothels. Many brothel workers found new employment opportunities in munitions factories and other war-related industries. The war economy's demand for female labour provided alternatives to sex work that had not previously existed, leading to significant changes in the industry's workforce. The social upheaval of the war also changed attitudes towards sexuality and women's roles. The traditional Victorian moral framework that had shaped attitudes toward prostitution began to break down, creating space for new approaches to regulation and social policy. Personal testimonies and voices, letters and diaries. The personal writings of Victorian brothel workers provide invaluable insights into their experiences, thoughts, and feelings. The correspondence of Emma Richardson, who worked in Manchester from 1870 to 1885, offers a detailed view of one woman's life in the trade. Richardson's letters to her sister in Ireland reveal the complex emotions of sex work. She wrote, "I know you disapprove of my life, but I want you to understand that I am not the degraded creature that the newspapers write about. I have friends, I read books, I have hopes and fears like any other woman." Richardson's correspondence shows her efforts to maintain family connections despite her profession. She sent money to support her sister's children and maintained interest in family news and local events. Her letters reveal a woman trying to balance practical necessity with emotional needs. The letters also document Richardson's business acumen and financial planning. She wrote detailed accounts of her earnings, expenses, and savings, showing her efforts to accumulate capital for eventual independence. Her financial records demonstrate the entrepreneurial skills that many sex workers developed. Oral histories. Some Victorian brothel workers' stories were preserved through oral histories, collected by social reformers and researchers. The case of interviews conducted by Beatrice Webb in the 1890s provides rare first-hand accounts of women's experiences. Webb's interviews with former sex workers reveal the diversity of experiences within the trade. Some women described their work as purely economic necessity, while others found aspects of independence and autonomy that were unavailable in other occupations. The oral histories also document the strategies women use to maintain dignity and self-respect while working in a stigmatized profession. Many emphasize their selectivity in choosing clients, their maintenance of personal standards, and their efforts to help other women in the trade. These testimonies provide counter-narratives to the dominant Victorian discourse about prostitution, which focused on moral degradation and social pathology. The women's own voices reveal complex human beings navigating difficult circumstances with intelligence and resilience. Court testimonies. Legal proceedings involving Victorian brothel workers preserve detailed testimonies about their experiences. The case of Regina versus Sarah Mitchell, 1881, includes extensive testimony from women who worked in Mitchell's Liverpool establishment. The testimonies reveal the daily realities of brothel life, the relationships between workers, the challenges of dealing with difficult clients, and the strategies used to maintain personal safety. The women's accounts provide detailed descriptions of working conditions, financial arrangements, and management practices. The court records also document the women's efforts to protect each other and maintain solidarity in the face of legal threats. Their testimonies show how they coordinated their accounts to minimize legal consequences while still providing truthful information. These legal documents preserve voices that might otherwise have been lost to history. The formal nature of court proceedings meant that women's testimonies were recorded verbatim, providing authentic accounts of their experiences and perspectives. Economic networks and business relationships. Supply chain management Victorian brothels operated within complex economic networks that extended far beyond the establishments themselves. The case of Mrs. Margaret Flynn's Manchester operations illustrates these broader business relationships. Flynn's establishments required regular supplies of food, alcohol, clothing, cosmetics, and medical supplies. She developed relationships with suppliers who understood the unique needs of her business and could provide discreet, reliable service. The clothing trade was particularly important to brothel operations. Flynn maintained relationships with dressmakers, milliners, and importers who provided the fashionable clothing essential for her workers' success. These relationships often involved extended credit arrangements and specialized services. Flynn's business records show payments to doctors, lawyers, police officers, and local officials who provided services or protection. These payments were regular and substantial, indicating the importance of maintaining good relationships with authorities and service providers. Real estate and property development. Successful Victorian brothel operators often invested in real estate, becoming significant property owners in their communities. The case of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell's Birmingham empire illustrates this pattern of investment and development. Hartwell began with a single rented house in 1872, but gradually acquired property throughout Birmingham's entertainment district. By 1890, she owned 12 buildings, including several that housed legitimate businesses such as restaurants and lodging houses. Hartwell's property investments were strategic and profitable. She purchased buildings in areas that were developing as entertainment districts, anticipating increased demand for both commercial and residential space. Her investments demonstrated sophisticated understanding of urban development patterns. The property ownership also provided respectability and influence that would not have been available through brothel operations alone. Hartwell became a significant landlord in Birmingham, collecting rents from legitimate businesses and respectable tenants alongside her sex trade operations. Financial services and banking Victorian brothel operators developed sophisticated financial services to meet the needs of their industry. The case of Mrs. Catherine Price's Birmingham operations shows how these services functioned. Price operated what amounted to a private bank for sex workers, accepting deposits, making loans, and facilitating money transfers. Her services were essential for women who were excluded from conventional banking and needed secure ways to save and invest their earnings. Price's financial operations extended beyond her own establishments to serve sex workers throughout the region. She maintained correspondent relationships with operators in other cities, facilitating the movement of money and credit across the industry. The financial services provided by Price and others like her demonstrate the sophisticated business skills that many brothel operators possessed. They understood complex financial instruments, managed risk effectively, and provided services that met genuine market needs. Conclusion: understanding the full picture, the complexity of experience. The experiences of Victorian brothel workers defy simple categorization or moral judgment. These women lived complex lives that encompassed survival, entrepreneurship, exploitation, resistance, community, and individual agency. Their stories reveal the inadequacy of both purely victimization narratives and romanticized accounts of sex work. The historical record shows women who made rational choices within constrained circumstances, who developed sophisticated survival strategies, and who created meaningful relationships and communities despite social stigma. Their experiences demonstrate human resilience and adaptability in the face of difficult circumstances. The Victorian brothel system was simultaneously exploitative and empowering, dangerous and protective, degrading and liberating. Understanding these contradictions is essential for comprehending both the historical reality and the contemporary relevance of these women's experiences. Historical lessons. The study of Victorian brothel workers provides valuable lessons about the relationship between economic opportunity, social policy, and individual agency. Their experiences show how legal and social restrictions can create underground economies that operate outside conventional regulation and protection. The creativity and entrepreneurship displayed by these women in developing alternative economic and social systems offers insights into how marginalized populations adapt to exclusion and discrimination. Their strategies for survival and success remain relevant for understanding contemporary informal economies. The gradual changes in attitudes towards sexuality, women's rights, and social policy that occurred during the Victorian era were influenced by the visible presence of women who lived outside conventional moral boundaries. Their existence challenged social assumptions and contributed to broader social change, preserving their legacy. The stories of Victorian brothel workers deserve preservation as integral parts of British social and economic history. Their experiences illuminate aspects of Victorian society that are often overlooked or misunderstood, providing essential context for understanding the period's social dynamics. These women's voices, preserved in letters, diaries, court records, and oral histories, offer authentic perspectives on experiences that have been subject to extensive moral judgment and social stigma. Their own accounts provide correctives to stereotypes and misconceptions about sex work and the women who engaged in it. The preservation and study of these stories also honors the memory of women who lived difficult lives with dignity and resilience. Their experiences remind us that historical narratives should include the voices of all people, not just those who enjoyed social respectability and conventional success. Through continued research and analysis, we can better understand the historical forces that shaped these women's lives and the ongoing relevance of their experiences. Their stories contribute to our understanding of economic necessity, social change, and human adaptation in the face of challenging circumstances. Their legacy ultimately reminds us that behind every historical period's official narratives lie the experiences of real people whose lives had meaning, complexity, and significance. The Victorian brothel workers whose stories we have examined were not simply victims or symbols, but individual human beings whose experiences deserve recognition, understanding, and respect.